The complete history of the Municipal water tower. There is a water tower on the edge of a small town in the middle of a flat and quiet part of the country, and it has been standing there for a very long time. It was built in the spring of 1923 by a crew of 9 men who traveled from the city in 2 trucks and set up a small camp near the edge of the municipal property. The foreman was a man named Gerald, who wore the same canvas jacket every day regardless of temperature and kept a small notebook in his breast pocket where he recorded the progress of the construction in very careful, very small handwriting. The entries are preserved now in the County Historical Archive, in a box on the second shelf from the bottom in the third row of shelves in the northeast corner of a climate-controlled room, and they read like this: Monday, posts set, concrete poured in sections 1 through 4. Tuesday, concrete still setting, light rain in the afternoon, no significant delay. Wednesday, concrete approved, work on tank supports began. The tank itself arrived by rail freight on a Thursday, in 3 large curved sections of steel that had been manufactured at a plant in Pennsylvania. Each section weighed several hundred pounds and required careful coordination to unload from the flat car and transport the 4 miles from the station to the construction site on a flatbed wagon pulled by 2 draft horses named Herbert and Clarence. The driver of the wagon, whose name was not recorded in Gerald's notebook, made 2 trips and was offered a meal by the camp cook on the second trip, which he accepted. He had a ham sandwich and a cup of coffee and then drove the empty wagon back down the road toward town while the crew began lifting the sections of the tank into position using a system of pulleys and guide ropes that Gerald had drawn out in his notebook 3 weeks earlier. The lifting took most of Friday and part of Saturday morning. When the final bolt was turned and the tank was sealed and plumb and true, Gerald wrote in his notebook, "Tank complete. Good work." He was not given to elaborate praise. The water tower was filled for the first time on a Tuesday in June of 1923, using a pump driven by a small gasoline engine that had been borrowed from the County Road Maintenance Department. The filling took about 6 hours. A few residents of the town came to watch, standing at a respectful distance behind a rope that the foreman had strung between 2 fence posts. There was nothing dramatic to observe, since the water entered the tank through a pipe and the tank did not visibly change as it filled. But the gathering felt significant to people at the time, the way that useful and permanent things feel significant, and a photographer from the weekly paper came and took a photograph, and the photograph was printed the following Thursday on page 3 of the paper, next to a notice about a church picnic and an advertisement for a dry goods store. After that, the water tower became simply a part of the town. It stood there through the summers and the winters, through the dry years and the wet years, through the years when the crops were good and the years when they were not. People stopped noticing it the way that people stop noticing the things that are always there. The tower was inspected twice a year by a man from the County Water Authority whose name was Mr. Halverson. He arrived in a pickup truck on the same 2 weeks every year, in April and in October, and he climbed the ladder on the south side of the tower with a clipboard and a flashlight and made his inspection, noting the condition of the steel, the level of the interior coating, the state of the access hatch and the vents and the overflow pipe. His reports were filed with the county and stored in a green metal filing cabinet in the Water Authority office and were reviewed by the county engineer once a year, usually in December, when the workload was lighter. Mr. Halverson retired in 1967 after 31 years of making these inspections. At his retirement party at the fire hall, someone asked him what was the most remarkable thing he had ever found during an inspection, and he thought about it for a moment and then said that one April he had found a bird's nest inside the ventilation cap, which was unusual because the cap was designed to prevent exactly that sort of thing. He described the nest in some detail, the materials the bird had used, the number of eggs, and then the conversation moved on to other things. The tower was repainted in 1938 and again in 1955 and again in 1971 and again in 1989. The painting of a water tower is a job that requires scaffolding and patience and a tolerance for heights and a very particular kind of unhurried focus, because the surface area is large and the paint must go on evenly and any section that is missed or rushed will show. The crews who did this work were contracted from outside the town, and they came and set up their scaffolding over the course of a day and then painted over the course of several more days and then took down their scaffolding and drove away, and the tower stood there freshly painted and very slightly brighter for a few weeks before the weather began the long work of making it look ordinary again. In 1955, when the tower was repainted, a question arose about the color. The original color had been a dark olive green that was common for water towers of its era, and by 1955 this color had faded to something closer to a pale gray-green that could have been described as sage or as nothing in particular, depending on the light. The Water Authority Committee met and discussed whether to repaint it the same color or to change it. One committee member suggested white, which was becoming more common on water towers in other counties. Another member suggested that they simply repaint it the original color and not make any changes. A third member asked whether there were any regulations that governed the matter. There were not. They repainted it white. The name of the town was not painted on the tower until 1971, when it became fashionable in the region for towns to identify their water towers this way. The lettering was stenciled on in dark blue paint and was visible from the county road for a considerable distance, which pleased the members of the town council, who felt that it gave the town a certain presence on the landscape. The lettering faded over the years and was repainted in 1989 when the tower was repainted again, this time in a slightly lighter shade of blue at the suggestion of a council member who had seen a photograph of a water tower in another state and liked the look of it. For most of the second half of the 20th century, the water tower was maintained by a man named Carl who worked for the Municipal Utilities Department and whose responsibilities included not only the water tower but also the water main valves, the pump station at the edge of the gravel pit, and several miles of distribution pipe that ran beneath the streets and roads of the town and its immediate surroundings. Carl drove a green pickup truck that had the town seal on the door, and he kept his tools in a steel box bolted to the bed of the truck, and he knew the location of every valve and fitting in the system from memory. Carl checked on the water tower every week, driving out to the property and walking around the base of the structure and looking up at it and checking the pressure gauge on the inlet pipe and writing the reading in a small logbook that he kept in the glove compartment of the truck. Most weeks the reading was exactly where it should be. Occasionally it was slightly high or slightly low, and Carl would make a note of this and monitor it, and usually it would correct itself by the following week. On a few occasions over the years, something required actual attention: a fitting that had begun to weep rust-colored water, a ladder rung that had worked itself loose, a crack in the concrete base that turned out to be superficial but was worth watching. These events were minor and Carl addressed them without drama. People in the town liked Carl. He was straightforward and competent, and when he told you something was fine, it was fine, and when he told you something needed attention, it needed attention. He retired in 2004 after 37 years with the Utilities Department, and the town gave him a small party and a plaque, and the plaque was hung in the Utilities Department office where it was seen mainly by the people who worked there. The person who took over Carl's responsibilities was a younger man named Derek, who had grown up in the town and had studied water systems management at the community college in the county seat. Derek had more certifications than Carl had had, because the state had added several certification requirements over the years, and he kept his certifications current by attending training sessions in the spring and fall. He also maintained a digital logbook rather than a paper one, which made it easier to review historical data and generate the reports that the state now required. But he walked around the base of the tower every week and looked up at it, the same as Carl had done. The tower was taken off service for 3 weeks in 2011 for interior inspection and recoating. During those 3 weeks, the town was served by a temporary connection to the regional water authority's main line, and most residents did not notice any difference in their water service. A local reporter wrote a story about the interior inspection, noting that it was the first time the interior of the tank had been formally inspected since 1989. The story ran on page 4 of the weekly paper. The inspection found that the interior coating was showing normal wear for its age and that there were no structural concerns of significance, but that recoating should proceed as planned. The crew that did the recoating worked inside the drained tank with respirators and portable lighting, and they described the experience afterward as strange and quiet, like being inside something that was asleep. The interior of the tank was dark and curved and smelled of metal and old water, and the lights they brought in cast long shadows. They coated every surface methodically, working from the top down, and when they were finished they climbed out and the tank was filled again and the town's water supply returned to normal. There have been 17 different mayors in the town since the water tower was built, and all of them have at one time or another during their terms looked out a window or stood in a parking lot and happened to notice the tower and had some version of the thought that it had been standing there for a long time and would probably be standing there still when they were gone. It is a common thought, easily forgotten, the kind of thought that comes and goes without requiring a response. The tower casts a shadow that moves through the day in a slow arc across the gravel and the grass and the chain-link fence at the edge of the municipal property. In the early morning the shadow falls long to the west and by noon it is almost nothing and by late afternoon it has moved around to the east. In winter the shadow is longer because the sun is lower, and in summer it is shorter, and if you paid close attention to the shadow over the course of a year you would have a very accurate record of the seasons, though no one has undertaken this observation with any particular purpose. Birds land on the tower. Starlings and house sparrows, mostly, and occasionally a larger bird, a red-tailed hawk or a heron passing through. The birds land and rest and then they go. The tower does not notice them, of course, but the birds seem to find it useful, and perhaps that is enough. In the summer of 2019, a young woman who was driving through the area stopped her car on the county road and took several photographs of the water tower with her phone. She was traveling for reasons she did not explain to anyone in the town, because she did not stop in the town, and she uploaded the photographs to a social media platform that evening from wherever she had stopped for the night. The photographs attracted a small amount of attention from people who found water towers interesting or who liked the light in the image or who were from the region and recognized the tower. Several people commented. A few of them said it was beautiful, which surprised the young woman slightly, because she had photographed it simply because it was there and the light was right and she was in the habit of photographing things she passed. But she agreed that it was beautiful, now that she looked at it again, and she saved the photograph to her phone and kept it. The tower still stands. The pressure is within the normal range. The quarterly inspection report filed last October noted no significant concerns. The repainting schedule calls for the next painting in a few years, and someone in the utilities department has made a note of it. The logbook records continue, week by week, in the careful and undramatic way of things that work. At night the tower is lit by a single red light at the top, required by aviation regulations, which blinks on and off with a steady rhythm. If you lie in a field near the town on a clear night and watch it, the light blinks once per second or thereabouts, red against the dark sky, red and then not red and then red again, keeping its slow time above the sleeping town while the stars move in their long arcs and the temperature drops and the air settles and everything becomes very still and very quiet and the blink of the red light becomes a kind of heartbeat, slow and patient and reliable, the heartbeat of something that has been. Standing long enough to have learned how to simply be there, which is sometimes the most useful thing in the world.